All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Marcos Conan Negron. Beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Rats. Ben, we are both 1-0. How are you feeling, brother?
I'm stoked, man. We're 1-0. Week one couldn't have gone any better, except maybe it could have.
Maybe, and that's something we'll break down. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to take turns breaking down the Eagles post game and then a Niners post game, and then we'll switch on over to view this week's matchups for each team, and then we'll check in with the Chargers as we are going to be doing this season, as well as pick our betting games of the week. So, let's start with the Eagles post game. So, the Eagles played on Friday in Brazil, and for those who didn't check out our post game, please go ahead and check it out. It's on our YouTube channel, and on for all you audio listeners out there, it's also on Spotify. Ben and I each individually did a post game immediately after both of our teams' games, and we just broke it down what we saw. So we're going to kind of summarize a little bit here. We'll probably bring up important talking points, but for game balls, quick reactions for how we felt in that moment, go ahead and check those out. They'll be on the channel. So the important thing, and I know we're going to talk about a few things here. We'll talk about Jalen in a second. We'll talk about some moments of the game that I thought were really cool. So, but the important thing that I didn't start with on the post game pod that I think deserves the attention here is Saquon Barkley's freaking awesome, dude. So, for those who didn't watch the game, Saquon Barkley debuted as an Eagle, and he got over 100 yards on the ground and 22 yards through the air and 3 total touchdowns. He is the first Eagle since Terrell Owens in 2004 to debut with 3 touchdowns. So I mentioned earlier in the offseason that I was like, okay, maybe he won't have that like exact CMC level impact, but I think his impact is going to be felt. And to watch that happen on Friday, I was going pretty insane. I was going pretty crazy with it.
It was crazy. I felt the same way. I was watching the game kind of get started, and obviously it was a slow start, especially for the Eagles. We'll talk about it a little bit, but once Saquon really got going and that offense got going, actually, honestly, once Saquon got going, that's when the offense got going.
Yeah.
And you saw this, like, for me personally, it reminded me so much of the immediate impact that I felt when CMC joined the Niners. And I know the first game that we had with CMC, he had no reps and he was thrown into a game against the Chiefs. And we ultimately lost that game. But you felt that impact immediately. And that's what you felt with Saquon and the Eagles this week. Like, it was an immediate impact. You felt his presence. The aura around him was just off the charts. Like, it was special.
Yeah, and then to emphasize like the environment of it all, again, they're playing in Brazil, and there was a lot of different factors from playing in Brazil that played into effect. Like the field was awful, and we talked about it going in. I was like, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. There's a lot of good reports out here. These guys were slipping and sliding from the jump. Saquon's first carry as an Eagle was a slip. He just falls on his ass. Like it was really it kind of set the tone for the entire game. Was just the slipping and the sliding. And but I mean, honestly, the atmosphere, I really liked the crowd in it. I know in the third quarter they were singing a Brazilian song on there, and the whole crowd was getting hyped. And I texted you guys, I was like, this gives me like a soccer game vibe. So I thought that was really cool to see. So overall, I think the experience in Brazil, and apparently reports are coming out now that the guys really had a good time. It was a good experience. Something that, will they want to do that again? I mean, nobody wants to travel that much to go play football. But I mean, I think that for them, it ended up turning out a lot better than the initial reports were suggesting going into the week. So that was a good sign.
Yeah, and I mean, with how much negativity was coming out prior to not just the week of, but the many weeks, the month before, like how rushed it all felt, I had an idea in my head that they were going to try and make it as accommodating as possible for those two teams. And ultimately, it sounded like everything went pretty well for them. So that's a big W for the NFL and actually for Brazil there. So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the fans seemed extremely passionate. There was fans of all teams there. It was really cool to see.
yeah.
So I really enjoyed watching that. So I think like from a fan perspective, that has to be really cool. So I'm happy that it happened. I'm happy that Brazil fans got to enjoy a football game. That was pretty cool. The one thing about that football game that wasn't enjoyable, well, one of the many things, because there were a few things, was definitely the refereeing in this game. 17 total penalties called in this game, and a lot in like, especially towards the end of the game, there was a freaking ton, dude, and it kind of just killed any momentum that was happening, because the game, after a slow start by both teams, the game really got going, and then penalties, 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 and I was like, dude, this is just, oh my gosh. And it, part of me was like, is this just, are both these teams just, first game vibes, like rusty, timing's off on a lot of these teams, or like, what is it? Because it was just a lot of, it was sloppy by both teams in this game for sure.
It was. I thought the same thing, and then I continued to watch all the other games throughout Sunday and even going into the Niners game Monday. It was a ticky tack weekend. It was officiated that way. The some calls that you're not going to see called in week 8 were called this week. And it's similar to what the NBA will do. It's probably similar to what the NHL does. It's like certain penalties, certain calls are made early in the season to make an emphasis on something. And so I expect to see more of the same, like with week 2, week 3. By like week 4, when you start to kind of settle into the rhythm of the season, the refs are in that same position. They're settling into the rhythm of it too. And
Yeah.
at this point, they've seen what's blatantly holding versus what's not holding, and what's blatantly lining up, in a legal formation versus what's not. And so these calls that are being made now, you're seeing 17 of them in this game, but in 5 weeks, you probably realistically only see like 9. However, it was sloppy from a standpoint of, it is week 1 too, where the teams are kind of feeling out, what they can do and what they can't do. And so you kind of take some chances here and there, and you're a little bit sloppy as a player as well going into week 1. So it's just the week 1 shenanigans.
Yeah, speaking of, you can tell not only were there shenanigans, but there was rust. And I think that's something that we had discussed, especially going into the season, especially around Philly. The discussion was, you have a new offensive and defensive coordinator, you're bringing in new systems. How is that going to look with no preseason time? And obviously, for the first 2 drives of this game, that ideology almost bit us in the butt. Jalen threw an interception on the first drive of the game when we were backed up in our own end zone. And then on the very next possession, there was a miscommunication between him and Cam Jurgens, and it was just a mistimed snap. Jalen wasn't ready for it. Fumble, turnover. I think, seriously, I think after those 2 turnovers, the reason we did not lose this game, I think it stems all the way back from these first 2 possessions that the Eagles had, was that the defensive side of the ball, the Eagles defense only held the Packers to 6 total points off of those 2 turnovers right out of the gate. And both of the starting field positions was, the first one was at the 13-yard line and the second was at the 19-yard line. So for them to only score 6 points off of that field position was game saving, in my opinion. And again, penalties for the Packers threw them off on both of those turnovers. They were struggling with a lot of holding calls, false starts, and stuff like that, and they saved the Eagles too. But I thought the defense played incredibly well and did a good job of not breaking. They definitely bent, and we'll talk about that in a second. But they especially early on, they stuck to it and kept the offense in this game.
Yeah, I think that saved the game, in my opinion. The fact that on those first couple drives, it was only 6-0. I was like, that was eerily similar to what happened when the Niners and the Eagles played last year, when you guys had a great shot at going up against the Niners 14-0, and it was only 6-0.
Mm-hmm.
I was over here like, we just dodged a major bullet and then another one. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, let's settle into our game, and there's still a game to be had here, even after all these mistakes. So the fact, you got out of that with it just being 6-0, then you march down the field and you get your touchdown and you're up, massive.
Yeah, and to have the first touchdown of the season be a Saquon catch out the backfield, it was really cool. Jalen threw a dot that only where Saquon could get it. And listen, when we talk about Jalen in this game, because it was touch and go there for a little while. He was, he has good moments and bad moments. There was so much, it was a roller coaster ride, right? He went 20 of 34, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And it could have been 4. It could have been 4 interceptions in that game. Definitely some boneheaded decision making by Jalen, and all the talk in the offseason was how he was kind of switching that narrative, how he was playing clean, going to his dump offs and playing it safe, not turning the ball over, and that was a huge emphasis going into the year. And 2 interceptions and potentially more was not a good look and does not instill any confidence in the fan base moving forward. And as much as, inexcusable, like both those interceptions were inexcusable. The two that were almost pick sixes were also inexcusable. But when it really came down to it, Jalen on that last drive, what really speaks to how this team really views him as a leader is, despite his up and down play, and considering how well Saquon was playing at this time, it could have easily been, we're just going to give the ball to Saquon over and over and over again to close this game out. But that wasn't the case. They put the ball in Jalen's hands, and he finished the job without turning the ball over and eventually got the Eagles to win. So it's hard to rate Jalen in this game, because in most situations we're going to and they're rightfully crushing him for some of his decision making. We're paying him $50 million. You can't play that way. But first game in a new system with a new center who's also playing his first NFL start as a center. And there was a lot of growing pains there. But once they got in a rhythm, this team looked good. And to think that we played so sloppily and still dropped 34 points, and came out with the win. We won ugly, but that's been Eagles football lately, and that's been annoying. But we got our first win since the funk. So I think that's a huge, that's a 1-0 feeling is much better than going into 0-1 and having to deal with all this at the same time.
So since we're on the topic of Jalen Hurts, and then you talked about just now being 0-1 versus being 1-0, I need to ask you, would you feel the same way you do about Jalen right now if the Eagles had lost this game, considering the miscues, considering the mistakes, the disconnects, et cetera, considering he had almost 4 picks? He should have been 4 picks in a lot of ways, but ended with 2. I mean, I want to know where you stand with that.
For me, and I was thinking about this too, right? Because, okay, so even if they lost, I think and again, it's hard to view this not in hindsight anymore because the Eagles are 1-0, but had they lost, you could have also those same things for the issues that were happening during the game, like the miscommunications, the new offensive system, all that fun jazz. That reasoning could also be used to what if they were to lose. Now, the turnovers have been a thing for about 10 games now, leaking into last season, where he's been the most turnover prone player. And that's something that it's hard to judge and make a final decision off of that in week 1 with a new system, with all these things happening around him. And given the state of the field and everything like that, it was weird. It was just a weird game. If we're seeing this version, though, of Jalen Hurts, where he's throwing almost 4 potential interceptions a game, where he's putting the ball in harm's way, and it's like week 5, week 6, and we're still seeing this, I'm not going to feel good. And Jalen is now hitting that stage where he is flirting dangerously close to, if he doesn't fix himself soon, we might have to start reconsidering this plan that we built around Jalen Hurts. And that's something that we don't want to think about. And that is something that, with this talent that we have around him, it's kind of hard to imagine, oh man, if we put, let's do the hypotheticals, if we put a Brock Purdy, if we put anyone else in the system with these weapons, would they be able to, just not turn the ball over? So I really think for Jalen, his issues are as simple as just make quicker decisions and don't turn the ball over. And it's funny because we thought going into this was a whole blitz argument, like, oh, what happens during the blitz? And the Packers did a weird thing. They blitzed, but they only blitzed 5. They didn't have a single rush where more than 6 guys rushed, which was very interesting given this whole hype around Jalen in the offseason about being bad at the blitz. And he only got blitzed on 8 dropbacks. 8 times he only got blitzed. And but he did really well. He went 6 for 8, 90 yards and a touchdown. So with a 5-man blitz, he seemed to do a good job picking up protections, and you could tell Jalen was the one running the show. Everyone was wondering, how's he going to look without Kelsey? He seemed really in control of the line and picking up protections and everything like that. The communication seemed to be there. So that was, again, there's just like little things that I'm like, I have to wait a few more weeks to see after they get a little bit more comfortable how this really will look, because we're looking this uncomfortable and we're dropping 34 points. Imagine what happens when this thing really starts to click for everybody, not just Jalen. So it's again, you don't want to see it. You don't want to see the turnovers. You don't want to see the sloppiness. But that's something that I like. It's hard to manage right now. It's hard to really get a grasp on.
Yeah, but I mean, the more you win, the more that masks it. You know what I mean? Like, winning hides a lot of those faults, and I mean, obviously, it only hides it to a certain extent. But it's week one. This is a lot more responsibility on Jalen's shoulders. Like, you talk about how much more he's taken on. You saw him making a lot more reads and calls out there this week, and so I think letting him get into rhythm, not overreacting right now, and seeing and kind of reevaluating the situation around like week 8, I think is probably the safest call, because I wouldn't put too much butter on this bread right now. It's early, you know what I mean? So
exactly. Week 1 overreactions are super common. So
I gotta say real quick, and this is my last little point on this game.
okay.
Zach Bond is a damn baller, bro.
Yes, sir.
He led the league, led the Eagles in 5 different categories this week. He had 4 pressures, 2 hurries, 2 sacks, 15 tackles, and 7 stops. Like, and all of that led his team. Just a masterclass performance for him. I think that he's just gonna get better, and he could be an elite part of that defense.
Well, and this is coming from a guy who, in New Orleans was just never used. Like, he had, I forget what number. He had a super low number of snaps, and he was an edge rusher, but he also could play outside linebacker. And I think in Vic Fangio's system, it's funny because one of the first people they mentioned in the offseason was Zach Bond. And Nick's year out is like, oh, we're going to love Zach Bond. They talked about him. They were raving about him. And me personally, I was like, I don't even know who this dude is. I don't know, what he's going to bring to the table. And I was like, wow, he looked like our best linebacker in a couple of years here. And Nakobe Dean also played really well. I think our linebacking core, obviously, there's some hiccups in a new system. They could have played a little bit better, but I think Zach Bond was consistent getting pressure, and he also was part of the reason that Reed Blankenship got that interception, because of the way he went back into coverage to force Jordan Love to throw it in a different spot. So he, again, for a first time in the Eagles uniform, he played really well. Another awesome debut, and that's great to see him and Saquon really just like make their impact on the first game, because a lot of this season is banking on our additions making an impact. And so no, for sure. And like the defense, Quinyon Mitchell played awesome for, his first game, and he was targeted 9 times, but he allowed 4 catches, 60 yards, because one of them was a deep bomb, but he only allowed a passer rating of 66. So he was kind of locked in. And it was funny from the jump that one pass early on in the game, they tried to target Christian Watson deep, and he prevented the catch, and he was just talking his stuff right away. I was like, I like this. This is the energy that you don't get to see in camp, but there was reports that he was talking crap to AJ and talking crap to Devontae, and I was like, I really want to see him in action now. And the first thing Reed had to hold him back. I was like, this is really cool. I like this guy. So, but okay, so what we'll do now, because there's a lot of cool things to break down, but again, if you want more post-game stuff, go check out the post-game pod. But one thing I wanted to bring up, we're going to start introducing new segments in here. So I would like to introduce you guys to Marcus's Moment of the Game. So this segment is something I'm going to be doing each week in regards to Philly, and if they're winning, it's going to be good moments. If they're losing, it's going to be bad moments. And trust me, I had multiple sets of moments prepared, because this game was touch and go for a little while there. But I have 3 moments in this game that really stood out. And number 1, or I'll go from third to first. Number 3 was the Reed Blankenship interception. At the time, you and I, and this was in the third quarter, you and I were texting, and I was personally feeling like the Packers were just, getting away with just a few, like, oh, we had missed opportunities. Like Darius Slay forced that fumble. We couldn't recover on Josh Jacobs. Like there was opportunities there. I was like, we're so close. Like I can feel it. And I texted you that drive. I was like, there's going to be an interception here. There's going to be a turnover here. And lo and behold, Reed was able to come up with a huge play. Again, we had just talked about it. Zach Bond went back into coverage to block the path that Jordan had there for Luke Musgrave, and Reed made an awesome catch. And that was awesome. So Reed definitely gets that moment because that kind of turned the momentum again in the third quarter. And then my second moment of the game is the start of the third quarter. Eagles come out, and a guy I did not show enough love to on the post game or today. AJ Brown was the recipient of a 67-yard touchdown where Jalen threw a beautiful pass to him, and then AJ did what he does best and just outran everybody on the way to the end zone. And that was a huge moment because, again, we had gotten points on the drive going into halftime, and we really wanted to take momentum, and that was our first lead of the game. Well, outside of 7-6, but that was the lead that we never let go of. So that was the part that was really important. And it was huge. AJ was having a good game to that point, but again, it just emphasized how good AJ Brown is and what he really and emphasizes his strengths. And he just had another awesome showing, 5 catches, 119 yards. So a touchdown. So shout out to him. And then my final moment, and it's not even a touchdown moment. This moment was at the very, very end of the third quarter. And it was at this moment where I was like, we're not losing this game, no matter what. And 17 seconds left in the third. Saquon Barkley gets a handoff, starts one way, he cuts back, and he's forced to just bend. And you're watching him just bend and just burst through the line. And he just broke free for 33 yards. And when he got up, he was just pumped up and like just exit. Like I'm having a picture of it right here for you guys to see, like his emotion there. I was hooked. I got goosebumps. I was like, this is it. This is the moment. And at this point, he had already had 3 touchdowns. And I was more hyped about that than anything because I was like, this is the big play. This is the big play ability that Saquon has. And I was really happy to see it. So those are Marcos's moments of the game for week 1 for Philly. So that was that.
Those are all fire moments. I agree the most probably with that last one because there's those welcome to the league moments where it's typically a negative. Well, this was the welcome to Philly moment, and it was a positive. And just seeing him explode the way he did, get up out of that, and just be absolutely amped. You got this sense of like, bro, I'm here kind of thing. Like
exactly.
Like, this ain't the Giants no more. I'm here to ball now. I'm on Philly. And it was special. It was cool.
Yeah, and again, I've watched that particular moment just over and over again. I've had my rewatches. I'm like, I'm looking forward just for that. And it was cool again with Saquon. Everybody's bought in. Like AJ celebrating with him, Devontae, Dallas Goedert's being the got caught on the mic'd up. They're saying 3 touchdowns, huh? Welcome to Philly. And like so, there was a lot of great energy coming with Saquon. And again, it could not have been a better debut. And again, Saquon was the reason we won that game. So definitely, without Saquon, we'd be talking about this team way differently. So that's what happens when you take risks. And this wasn't just a good weekend for Saquon. This was a good weekend for a lot of running back additions that, guys who went to new teams. Everyone played well. Like Josh Jacobs played really well in this game. It took him a second, but he ended up playing really well against Philly too. So I think week 1 was just like marred with like mid quarterback play, but like really good running back play. So honestly, I think that's enough on the Eagles for now. Again, if you want post-game stuff, go check out our post-game episodes in the pod. But we're going to break down what Ben saw from San Francisco's win against the New York Jets. So Ben, the topic of discussion for Philly was a running back, but also bad play from our quarterback. Your quarterback didn't get talked about that much in this game because that wasn't the important thing. CMC was out of this game. And for those not paying attention, that's probably a big deal, right? What do you think?
Well, you texted me pregame and you said, oh crap, CMC's out. And I was like, this is okay. And I even texted you back. I was like, this is okay. Because Jordan Mason is going to go off.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that this is his moment. This is his time. We have talked about so many times that next man up mentality. This bro lives and breathes it. And he came into the game and just was an absolute beast. And I can't emphasize enough what that means for the Niners going forward, the rest of the season, and honestly, just the rest of kind of CMC's tenure with the Niners. Because what it means is now CMC doesn't have to carry as much of that load. We have a true RB2.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, you can use him as an RB 1.5. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
he can take a lot of those reps off of CMC. And when you need CMC to be fully healthy, come playoff time, come hopefully a Super Bowl window, you will have him available to you because you haven't been running him into a brick wall 40 times a game for 18 weeks. So it was just hype. I was so excited.
So a couple things on that front, and I don't know if you know all this just yet, but there was reports coming out of the game that Kyle Shanahan said like, oh, if this was a playoff game, CMC would be able to play. But then now we're seeing, Jordan Mason went off. He played extremely well. With CMC dealing with what is like Achilles tendonitis basically.
Correct, yeah.
So it's like it's the Achilles we're talking about here. This is a really delicate and important piece of the body that has taken away seasons. So now that Jordan Mason played really well, how long realistically would you like to see CMC just kind of play it safe and stay out?
As long as it takes. It's hard to put a window on it because I'm not the one dealing with the pain itself. I'm not the one around it. I don't know what it looks like, what it sounds like. But I, from my understanding of Achilles tendonitis and tendonitis in general, is it's something that flares up and goes away. But it's something that you kind of have to just deal with as it comes and goes. And so for me, I look at, we broke down the schedule earlier in the offseason. I look at week 11 as being when the season really kicks into gear. We start to see some serious divisional matchups that can change the tides. We start to see the Packers. We start to see some top dogs, like we see the Lions at the back end of it. I'm looking around like the week 11 mark, and I'm like, CMC, you can gear up now. Like, you can be back, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And look, if Jordan Mason continues to do what he's doing through week 10, let's say we keep him out through week 11. I'm not going to say CMC sit out the whole season, but maybe there's an avenue there where it's like, we don't need to lean on CMC that heavily, even in those really tough games going forward. Like, I think this Jets game has been really, it hasn't been talked about enough, because I think that people still look at the Jets and they're like, well, it's the Jets. This time they have Aaron Rodgers, but he's rusty. He's super rusty. Well, okay. Do you realize that Jordan Mason and that Niners offense was still going up against one of the best defenses in football right now? And they put up 32 points on him and had a chance to do more so if a couple plays were finished properly. I'll get into that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at all those different, aspects of it, and I'm like, we haven't talked about this win enough and what it means to the Niners. But ultimately, I won't put a timeline on when I need CMC back, because we've seen 1 week from Jordan. I don't expect him to fall off the edge of a cliff or anything like that. I think he's going to continue being really useful for this team going forward. I do need to, on that note, though, give a little bit of flowers here. So,
okay.
Jordan's awesome. Okay. He had a killer game, played in front of friends, family, obviously in front of the fan base, had just an amazing breakout game, right? Well, he's asked after the game, when did you find out that you were starting? And he says, I found out, Friday. And he kind of just rattles off Friday as an answer. So then Kyle Shanahan's asked about, when did you, or he didn't ask him. He said something along the lines of, Jordan said you told him that he was starting on Friday and blah, blah, blah. And Kyle's like, I never told Jordan he was starting on Friday. Maybe he got that from coach X, Y, or Z, but I never told him that. I told him to be ready because there was a good chance that he'd be starting. And then Jordan goes on afterward for a press conference And they ask him, they ask him more about that question. He's like, I'm trying to figure out where I'm at with that too. I just don't know. Next question, And it's so frustrating for a couple reasons. The number one is like, this dude just had such an amazing game. Like, he's in his third year. He finally got some reps. He hadn't seen 32, or 30 carries since 2016. Like, it had been that long since bro had gotten this many touches. And he exploded. He had an amazing game in front of his family. And y'all are coming out here and roasting him for the media is coming out here and roasting him like that, or putting him on, not roasting him, but putting him on like this, watch or the spotlight with the wrong questions. But aside from that, as an organization, you have preached next man up mentality for years. You have 53 men that you can count on 2 weeks before the season starts. And you're not media training all 53 of them. That's the part that kind of blows my mind. Like, from that aspect, it's like, you knew he was your RB2 at the very least. So we're not media training our RB2. It's interesting. And maybe they did. And maybe it was just one of those moments like that, Jordan had such a killer game that he kind of minced words. Maybe Friday it was told to him, be ready. But Friday in his head, it was, I'm going to start. Like, I'm starting. Maybe that's how he took it. And then ultimately you shut this kid down and now he doesn't want to talk to y'all. So it's frustrating. It's annoying. I'm just going to pin it as just a weird thing that happened and hope that Jordan just uses it as motivation and pops off next week. But shout out to him. He had such a killer game, man.
Yeah, and again, for the press conference of it all, why that really matters and why that's such a talked about topic is because had he been told that, had the Niners told him on Friday that he was starting, they hadn't reported CMC is out for the game at that time. And normally when a player is going to be out, you disclose it as soon as possible. So the fact that they didn't have Jordan listed as the starter right away, they're like, oh, so if they're like, if you found out on Friday, the Niners should have done this, and that led to a whole like, is the league going to investigate? And they didn't. They said they weren't going to. So it's like, again, not that big of a deal, but it is frustrating that it's like, this guy, like you said, just had an awesome game. And he's probably thinking, oh my gosh, I had an awesome game. And he doesn't think that him saying Friday was going to just be a thing. So
right.
Unfortunately, that's just, it is what it is there. But
well, and you could tell too, like he had gotten lit up by a coach or the coaching staff or somebody in the organization prior to going on his final press conference. And that's the frustrating part, because it's like you didn't have his back, Kyle Shanahan, when you went up there and you were asked this question. And then somebody lit him up on a night where you shouldn't be lighting him up. Y'all should be popping champagne bottles and like celebrating this dude. It's just frustrating, man.
Yeah. So, okay. So on him, let's move on to what you saw from this game that I guess maybe what I saw that I thought was really cool. You guys created a new Aaron Rodgers meme, and I was really happy to see the kind of the like he looked lost. He was like, oh man, like I'm playing a really good team. And I think, the funny part about this whole Rodgers aspect of it is that I don't think people are surprised that a 40-year-old quarterback who's been out on an Achilles injury who's playing his first game in over a year, it looks rusty, and the team looks rusty. And they had a passing chart after the game, and every pass was to the left side of the ball. Like they had a clear plan. Like that was, they were Garrett Wilson. Where's he at? Okay, we'll hope for the best. But I mean, you guys just did such a good job defensively. How are you feeling? How'd you feel at the defense's first day out in this game?
Do you know why they went to the left as many times as they did, Marcos?
Why?
I'm happy to break this down for you. So let me start with this. Diamador Lenore had a great game, and he's poised for a breakout year. Okay. This game, he was sticky. He had a couple errors here and there, but ultimately he was the reason why we had the interception. He was the reason why a lot of third downs were not completed. He had a great game. Now, going into this game, I told you that Charvarius Ward said he wants to pick off Aaron Rodgers and he wants that damn ball to get signed, right? Well, Charvarius Ward played 45 snaps. All 45 times that Aaron Rodgers threw the ball while he was out there, he threw to the left side of the field, away from Charvarius Ward. And this is huge considering what the secondary looked like the last couple of years with this unit. Like the tremendous amount of growth that I've seen in that secondary unit now, especially with Diamador Lenore. Like like I said, he's showing that he's poised for that breakout year. But it was so evident that Rodgers was dodging Charvarius Ward the entire game. Every time those 45 snaps that Charvarius was out there, he said, "I'm not throwing to that side. I'm not throwing anywhere near him." I just found it hilarious.
No, it was really good. And again, Fred made his impact with a forced fumble early on in this game. And you got to see Leonard Floyd get his first sack as a Niner, or I guess, I don't know if it was a half sack or whatever, because Bosa was right there. But I mean, either way, his impact.
Full sack.
So you were excited to see that going in. So I was, when I saw Leonard Floyd, I was like, all right, the new addition is here. And no, honestly, I think the defense just like, they looked like the better team. And obviously the one drive they got scored on, that happens, right? And like, it's still week 1 for everybody, but out of when we were watching all these games during the week, you could tell like a lot of both of these teams offensively and defensively were tired. It didn't look that way for the Niners. It didn't look like they were tired at all. And it looked like Rodgers was getting a little tired of being in the game, so much so that Tyrod Taylor had to finish the game when they thought it was over, and he ended up making them look slightly more dynamic, unfortunately. But
yeah,
it was interesting, and it was funny that the Jets basically punted on it. And like, I guess you're being safe with Rodgers. He got his reps in. This was his first game back. Like, sure, whatever. But it was definitely interesting. It was a good humbling moment for the Jets hype, and I think fans are going to like what they saw from the Jets, but also they're going to be like, we have a lot of work to do. Our quarterback only threw 160 yards. So, the limitations are all of a sudden much more apparent for this team. And maybe had they been a little less sloppy, they might have been able to stay with the Niners a little bit more. But I mean, the Niners were clean and the Jets weren't. So I think that was a huge difference in this game too.
Yeah, and another clean aspect was Purdy. Purdy was relatively clean through this game, and a major shout out to an O-line that got a little bit of love this offseason via the draft with my boy Dominic Pooney. He had a phenomenal game. Pooney was mainly blocking Quinnen Williams, who only had one QB hit, and that was when he lined up more in front of like Colton McKivitz and kind of split between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So shout out to Dom Pooney, and the Niners O-line has entered top 10 in terms of PFF ranking. So
they look good.
I'm pretty hyped on that. It's good to see. And Purdy played a really, really clean game. He had some throwaways and he had a couple errant passes on one of the drives where I think something was in his head at that point. Maybe he was getting a little bit of pressure or whatnot. But he's just continuing to prove that he's an extremely elite QB that can put his entire team in a winning position. Now, one of those winning positions is throwing an absolute dot to the back of the end zone for somebody. And, on that note, Marcos, I have a segment like you do.
Yes.
And this segment is called I Need to Rant. Okay. This is Ben's moment. I need to vent. I need to rant. I need to get it all out. Okay. This is the I need to vent moment. For me personally, I got very heated. You called it. I didn't want to let you know ahead of time that you called it. Okay.
Yes.
But you called it. It's Brandon Ayuk. Brock Purdy threw a perfect ball to Brandon Ayuk in the back of the end zone at the end of the second quarter. And Brandon Ayuk just dropped it. The Niners paid Brandon Ayuk $120 million to be a wide receiver 1 option for us. He held in and out, not the burger, but he held in and out of training camps and practices all offseason and took a deal that puts him in the upper percentile of wide receivers in terms of money. Okay. In fact, in order here are the top paid wide receivers moving down towards Brandon Ayuk: Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill, and then there's Brandon Ayuk. Okay. All those dudes, they make that catch. Even CD, who had his own holdout, he'll make that catch. Let me continue for a sec. Jalen Waddle at 7, Devontae Adams, DJ Moore, Cooper Kupp. Those guys make that catch. So what did this ultimately prove to me and prove to everybody? That these holdouts does nothing but just hurt you personally. We talked about what it looks like in terms of, are you more injury prone coming out of a holdout like that? Yes, for sure. But, the question of, are you actually rusty? Can you still catch a ball as a wide receiver has been answered if you're Brandon Ayuk. And that question, bro, you did terrible in week 1. Absolutely terrible. And I need to see better from you.
I want to let you know too, or I guess I want to ask you. You mentioned that drop, but that wasn't the only drop he had in this game.
It wasn't.
And there was that one contested one that he had with Sauce played really great defense, but it's in his hands, right? And I just think that there was a part of him only practicing for 8 days that you could just see a little bit of the rust in Ayuk. You didn't see it in Trent because Trent's a dog, but I mean at the same time, like
he had to go take an IV though at the end of it because he had so many snaps. But
but I mean, Brandon Ayuk, man, I felt bad in the moment, but because I didn't want to upset you, but you guys were winning. I texted Ben and Ryan. I was like, "Oh, you guys paid Ayuk 120 million to drop it, huh?" And Ben was like, "I hate this stuff." It was bad.
Look, it was really frustrating. I didn't expect a huge game out of him. I don't think anybody really did. Ultimately, this isn't a huge deal that BA had the game he did. It's just a fun moment to be able to roast him for an off season of shenanigans leading up to an absolute subpar game. Give him till week 4 and bro's going to go off. I mean,
we'll be back in business.
He's going to be right back in shape, back in business, and we'll be rolling again.
No, I love that. All right. Any final thoughts that you have from this game that you felt like we glossed over? I know that you have more on the post game stuff. So if anyone wants to check that out, please go ahead and do. We're going to keep plugging away because, we're going to be doing this now. So if you guys want more, I wouldn't say in depth, but we will talk about the post game right after the post game. So it'll be more detail there as well. So.
Yeah, go check out that post game. I put a lot of love into it. But ultimately, I was really pleased with what I saw in week 1. And I got to say, man, the Niners are back. Like, this could be a better team than what we had last year if things go correctly.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, I think Jordan Mason became what you guys were hoping Elijah Mitchell would for this roster. Yep. And so now
we have an O-line that's capable of keeping Purdy healthy and happy and clean.
Yeah, all while pushing the run too. So I was like,
right.
So all this without McCaffrey, and then you still get to add McCaffrey to the fold. So when I saw this, I was like, dang, like this is going to be a problem this year. And again, Brock just has to do what he does best and just stay clean and stay consistent, and this team's going to be just fine. Those are the difference between our two quarterbacks for sure at the moment, is that one can be counted on to not turn the ball over and the other one needs to figure that out, get back into form. But no, overall, this was a pretty dominant showing by the Niners, and it would have been even more dominant had a few drops not happened, maybe miscommunications here or there. Niners could have looked like how New Orleans did against Carolina at that point, but we'll see.
Yeah,
it made me, I was like, man, I'm looking at this team, they're gonna be really good, and I'm gonna have to deal with it. So it is what
it's gonna be a problem. We'll see you in the NFC Championship game.
Yes, sir. Exactly. Once the Eagles clean their stuff up. So let's go into week 2. We'll preview these matchups. So what we will do this week is how we're going to preview games is we're always going to do whoever's going first, right? So the Niners do play first. They play Sunday at the 10 o'clock block. So they are playing the Minnesota Vikings, the red hot Minnesota Vikings, who dusted the super strong New York Giants 28-6 on their home field at MetLife. Are you afraid of this Vikings team going into week 2, going on the road?
No, I'm not. Because they played the worst team in football in a number of years. That New York Giants team might as well be some freaking plumbers that have never stepped on a football field before. That's a joke. They're damn good players, but that is not a complete team. Like what we see in New York any team that goes against them, that is just inflated stats. So all of what you heard and see from that game, I would take it with a major grain of salt. I would take it with a salt shaker. So I'll kind of get into it. So CMC is likely out once again. Per Ian Rappaport, he came out and said that it's considered a long shot that CMC plays on Sunday. I'm not tripping too much about that because I expect to see another big game from Jordan Mason.
Mm-hmm.
The Vikings pass rush and corners are presumably the biggest weaknesses going into the season on the defensive side. So obviously they had a decent game against the Giants, but I'm still not super sold on them. I expect Purdy and the wide receiver unit to eat through the air, honestly. I think that they get a number of reps this week. I think we see more reps, especially for Brandon Ayuk. And, I know that they have Harrison out there, but I don't know that he really moves the needle that much, especially if you can kind of shift things away from him.
Mm-hmm.
Offensively, the Vikings, they have our old backup. They have Sam Darnold. And I
Revenge
love
game.
Darnold. It absolutely is a revenge game, and I hope he treats it as such because I love Darnold. I think that he's a really good, he's a solid quarterback that can move an offense. He can operate through a playbook, operate through different looks that a defense gives him. But ultimately, he wasn't Brock Purdy last year, and that's why he was the backup. So I'm curious to see what he looks like because he looked like the second coming of Aaron Rodgers in his prime. You know what I mean? Like he looked insane last week, but I don't think that he's going to have that kind of a game against this Niners defense because this is a completely different team than they saw last week.
And the Vikings have good pieces, right? Like we want to, with this team, like you mentioned, a grain of salt is implied when it looks to the overreactions that came from week 1, right? But on paper, they don't look too bad. Like you got Aaron Jones out of the backfield, Jettis is back in the fold, then you have Hawkinson. Like you have a nice crew there, and they have good pieces along the O-line, although there are some weaknesses there that this Niners D will be able to exploit. The matchup I'm really excited for is Jettis versus Ward. I think that, or
Yes.
Lenore, whoever. I don't know if Ward's going to travel with him or
It'll
whatever.
be Ward. Yeah, he'll travel, I'm sure.
So if that's the case, I'm really excited for that matchup. And the D-line, I'm excited to see if they can build off of what they did last week. And you guys will get because you guys played Monday, you guys are coming off of a rest disadvantage. It's one day. It doesn't matter too much. And it's the beginning of the season. But, to go on the road, obviously the last time you guys played there last year, Brock got concussed and it was a loss and you were missing Debo and Trent. It was during that little slump there. And
on that note, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
The Niners haven't won in Minnesota since 1992.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, they've gone to Minnesota many times and not won. And
that's such a cool little nugget. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not cool at all. They're gonna break it tomorrow or on Sunday. It'll be fine.
Yeah, Brock broke his 0-2 streak on Monday night, which is weird. I didn't even anticipate that being a thing, which is funny.
It's weird.
But that's it. But yeah, I think they'll go in there and get a win. But I wouldn't be surprised if like the Vikings keep it frisky for like the first 3 quarters until the Niners finally deal the crushing blow. The question is, I wonder, is just like how the Niners are going to approach this game, and how much time of possession they're going to dominate, and the same thing with the Vikings. Like Brian Flores is an interesting play caller. Dude is as aggressive as it gets. I think Brock's going to be seeing a lot of blitzes. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle it, and I know it'll be just fine even without CMC. But I think this will be a fun game to watch. I think, weirdly enough, because of the offensive firepower that's on Minnesota, it might actually look a little bit more contested than what you guys had in week 1. So
yeah, I agree with that. Minnesota, they're not a bad team. I think they were unfortunately a lot of my casualty when we were doing the picks, early on in the season or, in the preseason. But there are so many pieces up and down that they're just missing some of like the the joints that'll hold it all together, if that makes sense. Like there
Yeah.
are a few key pieces to pull everything together away from being a really good team. And obviously, I think JJ McCarthy ultimately will give them a better shot to win. I think even this year he would have gave them a better shot to win than a current Sam Darnold would. Just because JJ's he can kind of do a lot. But yeah, Aaron Jones he's a force to be reckoned with. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison's questionable. I would be surprised if he doesn't play. And Brandon Powell, even and Trent Sherfield's on that team too, I think. And and it could be a little revenge game for him. So I think Nick Mullins is backup QB too. So they just love Niners at this point. There's a lot of revenge looking to be had, I think, in this one. So I don't expect them to go down without a fight. With that being said, I don't necessarily expect the end result to be close.
Okay. So if you had to give me a score, what would you give?
I've got 35-18 Niners. I think that
18's a random one, but I like that.
I think that the Niners find they find their rhythm offensively. Not that they didn't have it, but they find a real rhythm going into this week. They find ways to not just push the ball on the ground with Jordan Mason, but they find ways to get him involved in the pass game because he only had one reception last week for 5 yards. And he's talked about all offseason how that's the next aspect of his game that he wants to improve upon. So I could see him getting 2 or 3 more targets, maybe not that many, maybe 2 more targets through the air. And that just gives us a different dynamic. We talked about what's missing with Christian McCaffrey. Well, that's it. It's, running a route from the backfield or shifting or moving your formation. And all of a sudden he's lined up as slot receiver. I don't expect Jordan to line up as slot, but you could see some wheel routes. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that happens. But ultimately, I think that they find a way to break this game open and the Vikings kind of get a wake-up call because you've played a real team at this point.
Right, I get that. Yeah, because this is going to be their first championship level matchup, and I think this will be good for this team, for the Vikings to deal with. I will say, man, because okay, I gotta go realistic here because I was close to doing a 35-14 score, but I'll go 31-14. I don't think they're gonna score. I think Jettas is gonna get a touchdown just because, and then maybe Aaron Jones gets one on the goal line. I just can't see them. I don't see explosive plays coming from this Vikings team unless it's from Justin. That's the only guy who can really break a game open at this stage. Because Fred's gonna put TJ Hawkinson in a headlock. I'm just I'm not worried about some of these matchups that we're gonna see. And the Niners defense just looks as usual, as good as advertised, as good as usual. So, yeah,
I disagree. That D-line can be a lot better.
Well, okay,
I
guess you make a good point there. Do you think part of that's just continuity, or because the new faces, new guys, and obviously some injuries, little dings across there?
Absolutely. I think that plays a major aspect. I also think that also the players I'm about to name who are missing from this lineup are potentially coming back this week. We're missing Hufanga. We're missing Gross Matos. We're missing D Winters. All these guys are poised to potentially come back this week. So especially if we get D Winters and Hoof back, it's wraps. That's that defense and getting reps, a full game of reps together, it's going to start looking scary. It's going to be scary hours.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And oh man, they're just waiting in the wings to get back. And yeah, you guys look so good. So yeah, no, this will be interesting. No, for sure. This will be a good week 2 matchup. Good. This is going to be a good first game to start because I think it's the first one to roll on the weekend. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So let's pivot over to the Monday night matchup this week. And that'll be the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Atlanta Falcons at home for real this time at the link. Thank goodness we get to play on U.S. soil. It's going to be a lot of fun. And this was a hyped up matchup going into week 1 before the first set of games were played. Everyone's like, Atlanta's going to give Philly a run for their money. This Atlanta team looks awesome. Kirk Cousins isn't in the same exact boat as Aaron Rodgers, where he's an older guy coming off of an Achilles injury who hasn't played in a year. And then you go through these games and you watch the Steelers beat the Falcons off of 6 field goals. And I think what that told me is, when I'm thinking about this matchup and the Eagles versus the Falcons, I'm thinking, number one, where the Eagles could get gashed could be Bijan Robinson. Bijan is the one, like, you got to look out for him because he's the only truly dynamic playmaker on that team right now as it stands. And last week, for a good portion of the game, we were doing pretty well against the run, and then we ended up getting gashed at points in this game. So for a defense that likes to employ a lot of nickel with Vic Fangio and the Eagles, it's going to be interesting to see how they decide to attack Bijan. And I think if they just put their attention on Bijan and dare Kirk Cousins to beat them, I think we're going to be in a really good spot. And if there's one thing the Eagles have had over the past 3 exact seasons now, has been a Monday Night Football matchup on week 2 against Kirk Cousins. So we're 2-0 in our most recent matchups with him on week 2, and I think, Kirk's history on primetime games is just going to continue. He just looks rusty. Like, this could be the game that if the Eagles make him look really bad, the calls for Michael Penix are coming. And it's going to be, it's just, the Falcons put themselves in this situation, so I'm not even going to feel bad about it. I like Kirk. He's a great guy, but when you watched him against the Steelers, he was a statue, refused to move out of the pocket. He took any hit that he could, and TJ Watt was living in the backfield. Now, our defensive front seven is nowhere near as stout as this Pittsburgh team. So to just assume that the Eagles are going to come right in there and just freaking do the same thing that's not what's going to happen. I don't think. Bryce Huff was non-existent in week 1, and that's going to be something that the Eagles need to look out for and prepare for. How much usage is he going to have? He played less than half the snaps. So I just wonder, we paid him a lot of money to replace Hassan Reddick, and he's not meshing well in Vic Fangio's system. It's a little bit alarming there. But Jalen Carter got pressure, but we need more pressure from our defensive line if we really want to make a statement. And I think we can, especially right up the middle with Jalen. And maybe the field had something to do with it in Green Bay. Green Bay wasn't really getting pressure on us either. So it was one of those things that maybe the field has something to do with some of the scheming of it all. So hopefully back at the link on the grass that they're familiar with, they're, get to put, their toes down and just dig in and go for it. But I just think they have a great back seven, like Jesse Bates. They signed Justin Simmons. They brought in Matthew Judon. They got AJ Terrell. Like, those guys, those studs, they have those. But then the rest of the roster's kind of meh. They have Christian Ellis, a former Eagles cut as their middle linebacker, and their other corners outside of AJ Terrell are meh. And then they have Grady Jarrett on the defensive line, but him and Judon, and that's it. And the Eagles' backup O-line, this new look offensive line, did a really good job against Green Bay in week 1. So Jalen wasn't seeing that much pressure, and they did a really good job of extending time with him and making the run work really well with Saquon. And I think Saquon's going to be another featured piece in this game. I'm excited to see how they utilize him, because Pittsburgh wasn't able to run the ball that well, and they have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. So I'm really interested to see how Saquon looks, and how, if Saquon struggles, will this defensive line, or will this offensive line, like, will they just change up and have Jalen try and go for it? And then if that is the case, turnovers. Jalen, you got to play clean, my dude. Like, that's going to be the biggest thing. I don't expect 3 turnovers in this game from Jalen like I did in Brazil. So if he just stays clean, we're going to win this game. Like, I don't think everything else will work itself out. I think we're just too talented in that sense.
I am concerned only because I think that the Falcons might have the better defense, but I feel like schematically, you guys, the Eagles, should be able to figure out this Atlanta defense quickly. And ultimately, their defense isn't going to win them this game. Like, the Philadelphia offense is so much better than the Atlanta offense, to the point where it's
exactly.
Like, unless the Falcons are going to pick off every single pass that Jalen throws and run it in for 6, I just don't see a scenario where they can beat you guys. I mean, obviously Bijan on the ground, that's going to be a great option considering what Josh Jacobs kind of did to you guys last week. I think that, yeah, he has a chance to go for a decent to big game. Aside from that, I think the only other place that they could find success is through Drake London, just in his height and his size. Because some of the secondary for the Eagles is not on the shorter, smaller side, but it's just in terms of matching up with a guy that size, it's tough in general. So, if Kirk and Darnell can find a rhythm, in addition to a major game from Bijan, that's the only way I really see the Falcons keeping it close. And that's not saying that they win this game. That's just saying that they keep it close.
Yeah, and listen, I think that I agree with that entirely, because the only way the Falcons will stay in this is because their defense is going to keep this game close enough to where their offense has a puncher's chance of staying in this. Because I also think this is also a good test for Philly too, because the cornerbacks, I mean, Jair Alexander's a good corner, and and McKinney made a good play. But I think the back seven play from Atlanta is going to look better than what we faced against Green Bay. So I think that aspect is going to be tougher, and Jalen needs to play cleaner. And I think that oh man, okay. So let me think about this, right? Because if I'm putting a score to this game, I see that if the Eagles can generate pressure on Kirk, he's already going to get the ball out quick. But if we can get in his grill a little bit, make him rattled, we have that. If we can keep Jalen upright and clean, and he doesn't turn the ball over, and we're moving, we're good. And then our skill position player, Saquon, has a good game, or we force turnovers on our end, right? There's no reason why we don't win this game by 10 points. There's no reason. We can win 27-17, or we could win 31-21, something like that. I think our offense is going to figure out ways, even if we start off. So we had 3 turnovers and we still dropped 34 points. This is a thing that we can, once this offense starts clicking, there's going to be a legitimate conversation that this offense could be the number 1 offense in the league, next to the Niners in that sense too. But if we just play a clean game, we should own this game, because the Falcons have shown, especially so long as they're going to keep running Kirk out there, that they are going to be the inferior team. And the Eagles beat a team that everyone thought was a Super Bowl contender in Green Bay. And obviously Jordan Love got hurt, but that was at the very end. And he played horribly too. So I don't know, man. If we're getting, I don't think Kirk from last year, who's throwing to Jettas, is just going to randomly show up either. I think Kirk is rattled and shaken from this game, and he knows his own, primetime hype that's behind him. I just don't see a world where we lose this game.
Yeah, I personally think this is going to be a blowout game. I had the Eagles winning this one actually 27-13. I'm thinking about, we talked about that moment, your moment of the game, right? Where Saquon came up after that massive run and just flexing, right? And it's that I'm here. It's that moment. Well, y'all are back in Philly, and that fan base is hyped because you're not the only one who saw that. The NFL ain't the only ones that saw that. Those Philly fans saw that, and they're hyped. That stadium's going to be loud, man. The second that Saquon gets that ball and does something nice with it, they're going to be amped up. So I think ultimately they're just going to ride a lot of momentum in this one, and I just have a good feeling about this one.
And that's the thing. I think one thing that the Eagles fans, we saw a lot of good things, right? But I think the one thing that this team has been missing since last year has just been a consistent stretch of playing clean, dominating football. And they can start here. They can start these next couple weeks. They won an ugly one in Green Bay, but showed out their potential. Now, if they can just lock in a little bit more, maybe just 1 turnover if the worst happens, but we're still winning efficiently in a dominating fashion, right? Limit the turnovers. And if we can do that for an extended period of time, dude, then there's no reason to think why we won't be meeting in the NFC Championship game this year. So
Yeah.
I think once Eagles fans see that, I think that the calm of the whole aura of that collapse is still lingering. It's still there. Just because we won week 1, it's not. It's still hovering here. Like, we can't help but shake that feeling until they're giving us a reason to think otherwise. So week 1, we got the win. That's fine. But we can only say we got the win so many times. Last year we ran into the same issue. So I want a good stretch of just dominating wins, please. So hopefully we can start that on week 2.
I can hear the trauma in your voice when you're talking about it. You poor guy. Like, you had to go through that. I feel so bad for you.
Crazy.
No, I don't. I experienced 2 Super Bowl losses in the last 5 years, actually.
Part of history, man. No. Yeah, so I'm excited for that. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Let's move on. We'll push forward to, we're going to do our Chargers check-in. So again, for those who don't know, the Chargers are Behind the Back Pod 3rd team of the season that we will be keeping track of to see if they can beat the odds and make the playoffs this year. So they started off good. They played the Raiders, so they won 22-10. And this had that whole energy of this game was 2 rusty teams, 2 offenses that needed to figure some stuff out. And this was a division game because they were fighting during this game too, and it was kind of brewing from start to end. The new Las Vegas Raider Christian Wilkins was out there just wanting all the smoke from everybody in this game. So, what was something for you that stuck out to you in this game?
It's the Harbaugh effect. This was such a Harbaugh game if I've ever seen one. I guess it was methodical. The drives were long. Nothing went for massive yards in terms of offense. It was just a very composed game. And obviously there's growing pains in the new system and the new players, the new faces, right? But you saw a little bit of what this team can be. Now, what was a little frustrating for me was I saw a lot of the old Jim Harbaugh issues that I had issues with before, and that's that he just doesn't let the quarterback air it out that much.
Yeah.
And we didn't see Herbert go long. I don't think I recall a single one going over 25 yards. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that only happened once. It was that the Hayden Hurst catch. That was the only pass that went for that long. Yeah.
That's right. So, aside from that, there was nothing else. It was all I hate to say it, but dink and dunky, you know what I mean? It was but it wasn't a bad game from him. He went 17 of 26 for 144 yards and a touchdown, but ultimately they won this game with that ground game with 10 carries, 135 yards and a touchdown by J.K. Dobbins, who, I'll hand out my game ball now. That's my guy in this one. He was the reason that the Chargers, had the impact they did, kept the drives going the way that they did, and ultimately, just took it to the Raiders. So I thought it was a good start to the Harbaugh era.
Yeah, same. And again, like you mentioned, it was about as Harbaugh-ish as it could be. And I think, again, with some of the quarterback play this weekend, threw me off because a lot of these talented guys, the Burrows, the Herberts, all these guys, you're seeing them throw for 150 to 200 yards, and then you're seeing Gardner Minshew throw for 250 plus, and it was just a weird day, a weird week for quarterback play. So, I didn't know what to make of it, but at the same time, when all these running backs are making impacts on their new teams, it's really I don't know if I would call it the year of the running back just yet, but I think it's something that we're going to start seeing these teams who are just more balanced or are attempting to be more balanced in order to keep drives alive, win the time of possession. I think that's just going to be the way things go this year. And I think that the Chargers will be able to live in that world where that's how they win games. And their defense looked good. I thought, I get it. It's the Gardner Minshew led Raiders, but Minshew played pretty well. And, I was happy with what I saw from that defensive line. Like Poona Ford looked really good. Bosa and Mack made their presence felt. I thought it was an overall good showing by that team. So I was happy to see it.
It was honestly both D lines made a presence. But I think in terms of what the Chargers need to do better going forward, obviously, and it's week 1, right? There's some time to do it, but um, they were sloppy with their penalties. They had 7 of them going for 50 yards. That you need to fix that, especially if on the other side of it, the Raiders only had 2 for 15. Gotta fix that. Their third down efficiency was trash. They
Oh
were 4 of
yeah,
15.
that was a thing.
And that wasn't Harbaugh-esque, because Harbaugh, he doesn't look at the full length of the field, at least from my perspective. He doesn't look at the full 100 yards or however many you got to go, right? He looks at 10, 10, 10, 10.
Exactly.
That's how, that's why I talk about this Harbaugh-esque game. It's slow. Like, it takes time. But, I think that actually there's a point. I think that the reason why they had so many third down flops was because they're in week 1. And because Harbaugh is playing the way you're calling the way he is, this team needs to adjust to that. And once they do, you're going to see this team go for like 11 third down conversions on like 17 or 18. And that's when you're going to start getting into those elite numbers, when they can continue to get drives going, but or keep them going. But yeah, I mean, they came out, they got the win, and we could sit here all day and talk about the negatives and the positives, but ultimately, like, the biggest thing is that they got the win in week 1, so you started it off right.
And then they'll continue most likely that trend as they will go on to face the Carolina Panthers this week. We talked about the Giants in a very positive light. I think you can literally slide the Panthers right in that same bucket of potential for the number 1 pick this year. For a third consecutive year, they'll be in the running for the top pick. This whole Bryce Young experiment was it's looking worse every time CJ Stroud takes the field. And if I apologize to Carolina fans that have to deal with this, plus their ownership is terrible. So this is a great place for the Chargers to kind of mess around with new tactics and maybe, see what happens if you give J.K. Dobbins more of a look. Gus Edwards was struggling a little bit, or maybe this is the Gus Edwards game because they lost their best defensive tackle, Derek Brown, for the season. So sucks for Carolina. Like, it's just, string of bad news here. But again, they'll be closer to being able to rebuild this thing the way they want to. But I don't know, man. Sucks for them, but I think this is a good game for the Chargers to continue to build off of, and we'll be ending up 2-0 hopefully by the end of this. So that's how I feel about
that. I agree 100%. I'm not there with Bryce yet.
I don't know if I ever will be.
Yeah, I was just about to say it. Like, I think that he's not in the right organizational situation for him to actually grow into a player that's going to get consistent reps and have a consistent career. I think it's like a Sacramento Kings situation of the olden days, where it's like terrible developmental, strategies, and it's not really good right now. It's not a good situation in Carolina. So yeah, I expect the Chargers to come out, just whop them. If I had to put a score to it, let me think. I think that they break it open a bit this week. I think that we see some deep balls from Herbert, believe it or not. I think that Jim kind of goes in his bag and he's like, all right, let's see what you can do, kid. And I'm going to say Herb goes for 280 yards. We'll say 3 touchdowns, and we'll mark it 28-10.
I mean, hell, if the Panthers made Derek Carr look like Drew Brees 2.0, I mean, there's no reason to think that this team couldn't do a little bit of the same. I'll probably go. I think what I'll do is I'll go 28. I think I'll go 28-7. I don't see a world where Carolina
7.
I mean, this defense is good. I think the Chargers defense is good enough to handle this. Like,
But even in garbage time, Marcos, I mean, think about the garbage
I
time
mean,
minutes.
yeah,
I'm talking that's fourth quarter.
blowout 28-7, locking it in. But I mean,
I
yeah, I
love
don't
it.
care. I mean, they're gonna win, so it won't matter. Okay, so I think that's good for our Chargers check-in, and we will move on to our 3 picks of the week. So, just like we did last week, and as we will be doing the rest of the season, we will be picking 3 games each week that we think are winners in terms of betting. So we think one team will cover, or one team will the underdog will cover. So we're going to describe 3 games that neither of us know which one the other guy picks, and we might have the same one. So we'll see what happens. Ben, what is your first game that you have?
First game I have is Bills versus Miami. Miami currently favored by 1.5.
Mm-hmm.
I think they cover with a win at 24-21.
Wow. The funny part is I have the exact same game. I have the Bills winning off of a field goal so they can cover. So, as long as the Bills win, they'll cover. I have the Bills winning this game. So I think the Bills were going to cover this one. Okay, so then I will go for number 2. I had to go for a layup here, and I don't think there's a bigger layup than the Commanders only being 2-point favorites at the New York Giants. It's at Washington. This is, Jaden Daniels, second game now. He played decent in his first game. The Giants aren't going to be able to score on them. It's going to look really bad. Danny Dimes is not the same guy. I don't know what the heck is going on there.
It's a mental thing.
Yeah, it must be. And they're probably extremely traumatized after watching Saquon do his thing. So I just think the Giants are in a bad spot, and I think all the Commanders have to do is hit a field goal, and they'll win this game. So I don't think the Giants will pose any issue. Ben, what is your second game?
Niners versus Vikings. The Niners are only favored by 6 points. Let's be realistic. I think it's going to be a little bit more than that. I gave my score prediction. I said it was going to be 35-18. That's definitely more than 6.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great pick. What is your third?
This one was easy for me, okay? Rams versus Cardinals. This makes no sense. The Cardinals are favored by 1.5. I already found it weird that the Cardinals were favored in general. The fact it's by 1.5, I'd be amazed if the Rams don't flip it and win this game by at least 3.
Well, and I think that's the interesting part when we look at betting lines, right? Is that they always give so basically what they're saying, if the 1.5 line is the Rams are technically like favored, but like not really, because if how the betting lines work is the home team normally gets 3. Like if it's -3, that means it's probably going to be an even game. But then if it's anything more, then they're whatever. So they're saying that the Rams should win this game. And I debated that game, and I'm interested because, with all the injuries that happened in week 1 to LA, I have no idea how they're going to respond and handle it. I mean, they still almost beat the Lions with these injuries, so it'll be interesting to see how they come out. But I think when I had to look at this, I think my third game, I feel weird doing this one, but I felt like they would be kind of frisky. And I'm going to do it again. I bet on them to win last week, and they did. But I didn't put them on a cover. But I have the Pittsburgh Steelers covering against the Broncos. Even if the Broncos they looked nice against Seattle and they showed potential, and the Steelers had 6 field goals. But I also think that the Atlanta defense is actually a solid unit, and I think Denver, even with Pat Surtain, they're still very much a work in progress and allowed 20. I forgot what it was, however many points they allowed to Seattle. But I'm betting on the Steelers again. They were one of my teams to look out for, so I'm gonna ride with them and see if they'll give me another win.
I love it.
All right, Ben. Any final thoughts now that we are done with our picks of the week? Broke down our post game, pregame. You excited for week 2? Any final thoughts before we head out here?
Yeah, shout out Jake Moody for being NFC Special Teams Player of the Week, for going 6 for 6, getting 20 points by himself and beating the Jets by himself. I mean, 20-19. Can't do any better than that.
Yeah, that's actually
That's all I
crazy.
got.
Year 2 Moody's going to go crazy. And he looked good. And they even hit that doinker. I'm glad that one went in too. So looks like he's poised for an awesome season. So I was happy.
He's here.
He's here. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, I hope the Eagles can clean stuff up and show me that they're a functional team from start to finish. And I don't want to, just Jalen Hurts, no turnovers, please. I beg you. Yeah. So with that being said, this is episode 57 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13 gmail.com. Hit us up on any of our social medias that are located above. For all you audio listeners out there, the links to the descriptions are down below. Please like, subscribe, rate, comment, all that fun jazz. It helps us grow. We love it. We're excited to see what happens. We're adding more stuff, as you guys will be seeing. So we're really excited for it. In week 2, both of our teams started off strong, so we're gonna keep that going. I am Marcos Conan. Beside me here, as always, is
Benny the Jet.
We got y'all. We love y'all. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.